Hello and welcome back to OT, the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. I'm Commander Felix Schultz.
I'm Andy Grant.
I don't know why I've given myself a rank this time. It just felt
Every week it's different.
Yeah, well, you gotta spice it up. Our podcast relationships can get a bit stale sometimes, so you gotta keep it fresh. What have you been up to, Andy?
Bits and pieces, Felix. There's been a little bit happening in the last few weeks.
Yep.
What can I tell you? I got a new Timex.
Hey!
Got a new Timex QLCA.
What? What does that look like? Is that one of the is it digital or?
Yeah, the digital. So that came earlier this week with a bunch of American candy.
Nice.
So it's the reissue. So it's the reissue that they made. I guess it's like from the 70s. But it came out, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, September.
Yeah.
It's got, dual time, alarm function, all that fun stuff. The old school.
Is this one that's got like a picture of like an analog dial on the LCD?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. How are you finding it?
It's pretty cool. It's got this really useless light function, as they tend to have it. It's in a really inconvenient spot. It's got a really useless function. For a couple $100, it's quite fun. I imagine it brings out a lot of nostalgia for some people.
How's your dad finding it?
Yeah, I haven't swapped him yet. I think I prefer the regular Q that he has, but I don't think I've even shown him this yet.
Well, maybe he can start a Timex collection.
Yeah, get a little Instagram handle at Timex Collector. It probably exists.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Shout out to our
to
Timex
be honest,
Collector.
Yeah. We'll link him up. But look, to be honest, Jack Forster from Hodinkee did a really good in-depth review and says everything better than I possibly could. So,
in fact, that's not the only Hodinkee related Timex news. They did another an LE.
They did,
which I thought was like very, very nice. I was quite into it, and I thought to myself, should I consider buying this? But then I thought, no.
Is it limited?
Honestly, I don't know. I assume it is. It's a Timex Q, and it's like a polo, like a white dial, sort of faded lume, and a steel 12-hour bezel. So it's kind of like if you want a Polar Explorer 2, but don't want to spend 10 grand on one, and just kind of want shop the look for less style. I think it's really nice. I think it's pretty cool, pretty on brand, and I think they did really well with it. Also says Hodinkee on the dial, I think.
It does.
Which I found interesting.
Is it limited? Notify. Yeah. So there's a wait list for it. Yeah, it must be. How many is it?
Actually, it's probably already selling for 10,000. The Rolex is probably the better buy.
Just broken records for Timex prices. Let me see. I don't know how many it says. There's a few. There must have been a couple hundred or something.
Speaking of limited editions, we should probably telegraph this week's guest, Andy Grant.
Yeah, who we got?
We have the one and only William Massena, who you will.
Who's that?
Well, you might know him from a few places. If you're old in the watch game, you'll know him as Timezone OG. If you've sort of a diehard of Hodinkee, he'll pops up every so often there. He's done talking watches. If you are into hypey limited editions, you'll certainly know him from Massena Labs. So we talk about all these things and many, many more. What did you think of our chat, Andy?
Pleasantly surprised. I've never met or spoken to William Massena before. I really didn't know what to expect other than sort of hearing him on, I think, Hodinkee Radio, and maybe reading a profile piece with him on A Collected Man from a few years ago. Yeah, really interesting guy. I think it was a good chat, and I think I enjoyed sort of the challenge of interviewing him and sort of putting a few, I don't know, like firmer questions to him to sort of really flesh out what he's been up to, which at this point, speaking of Hodinkee, limited editions, he's released a new watch which we can talk about because it's out and probably sold out.
Yeah, sure. I find him a little bit. I've always sort of found him intimidating. I don't know if I really sort of said this in the interview, but I started learning.
You're too scared to.
Yeah, legit. Like I sort of learnt about watches on Timezone, and he was someone that was not to be messed with in the virtual sense there. So yeah, it's really cool and interesting to see how these things come full circle. But before we get into that, Andy, we need to have a little break-a-rooney.
Today's episode of OT, the podcast, is brought to you by our wunderbar sponsors, Nomos Glashütte.
Nomos is one of Germany's best watch brands, and it's one very special to me and Andy. I've been wearing my Club Automat all week, and it's the most sentimental watch I own. I've had it engraved, and it's not going anywhere. Nomos has been around since 1990, and they've certainly achieved a lot in the last 30 years. But watchmaking has been integral to the town of Glashütte for a lot longer, 175 years now, and Nomos is celebrating the anniversary with a trio of cool new limited editions.
If you caught episode 37 with Neil from Discommon in it, you'll have heard us talk in more detail about the brand new Nomos Lambda in steel. I've actually been wearing the white enamel dial around for a little while now. We're going to have more Nomos chat in the coming weeks. The Lambda is a special watch in their collection. Refined, dressy, with a beautiful, beautiful movement.
Absolutely agree. Here's the top line 3 dial options. You've got white, blue, or black. Super impressive 84 hours of power reserve or 3.5 days. And the power reserve indicator is front and center on the dial. The case is sleeker too. It's down to 40.5 millimeters from the previous 42 millimeters of the gold versions. It's not often that you find this level of high end watchmaking in steel, especially not at this price point. And make no mistake, this is a high end movement. It's the DUW 1001, a beautifully done piece of traditional German watchmaking. It's a 3/4 plate with fine sunbeam polishing and Nomos perlage, gold chattons, as well as a hand engraved balance cock inscribed with lovingly produced in Glashütte. In German, of course. I think it's perhaps Nomos's most pretty movement and one well suited to celebrating this anniversary.
Question for you, Felix.
Mm.
Who is this for?
Well, being in steel, it's priced competitively and it's hard wearing. The movement is also top notch. I think this would work well for someone who wants a sleek, minimal design watch as their daily, or perhaps a collector looking for something special. For me, though, this new steel case turns the Lambda from a special occasion piece into an everyday one. Andy, what's it like on the wrist?
It's light and lovely on. The strap is rather comfortable. The smaller case size wears well, and it is also zero point 0.1 of a millimeter thinner than the precious metal options. The strap has also got a delightful winged clasp, which is an extra spot of class on the clasp. As we've said, the movement is a treat to look at. I will post plenty of pictures to Instagram and we'll link them all up. It just looks great. Also, love the packaging. It's a long leather wallet that's made out of full grain leather, protects the watch beautifully, lets it just lay flat and buckle in. No bending the strap, no zippers, no buckles, anything like that.
And how much are we talking, Andy?
Felix, it is a scaled down steel in steel, which is a huge deal. You're looking at 10,400 Aussie dollars, 5,800 euros or 5,800 pounds sterling, or 7,500 USD. And each dial is limited to 175 pieces.
Lambda stands for precise legibility and precision timekeeping. Visit nomos-glashütte.com, that's nomos-glashütte.com to see the new steel Lambda for yourself and to make your wrist the center of attention.
Thank you, Nomos. Guys, we think you're going to love the Lambda. Let's get back to the show.
Refreshing, refreshing, refreshing. Andy?
Control R. What do I like, Felix?
That
Well,
took
I've
me a
been
second to get that
liking.
control. I gotcha.
You're a Mac user, so it's probably Commander. But I've been liking a bit of aviation, I guess history. It all started with a podcast that led me to a book called The Skies Belong to Us.
Uh-huh.
It's a few years old now, but it's by a gentleman by the name of Brendan Kerner. I think I pronounced that right. We'll link it up. But it's a look at what they call the golden age of hijacking, which is sort of the 1960s to the early 1970s.
Yeah.
Basically, it was an epidemic of plane hijackings, and it had a very different meaning back then. It wasn't, grab a plane and use it as a weapon. It was grab a plane, hold people hostage,
Get some
and
money out of it.
either like get money out of it. A lot of airlines had really like tight policies around hijacking, so they would just be like automatic payments, basically.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars in exchange for the plane, and then everyone released safely.
And did they also use it to like get prisoners released and like all that sort of political?
All sorts of agendas, yeah, and they used all sorts of different weapons to hijack the planes.
Yeah.
Often it would be to fly to places that were you weren't allowed to go to. Like Cuba was really popular, to the point where sort of let's fly to Cuba became a bit of a catchphrase of the time. But what's really fascinating is there's some very famous cases. If you're into it, you'll know the case of DB Cooper, who I think got $1 million and some parachutes and jumped out of the plane and was never seen again. And no one knows exactly what happened there. Yeah, it's crazy.
So he had $1 million on the plane.
Yeah,
and just disappeared from the earth
forever. Like it's unsolved. They don't know where the money went. They don't know where he went. They don't even know if he survived. So they kind of think he probably landed in a tree and didn't make it. But But what's really interesting there is that it was a time where there was no airport security. So you didn't get ID checked. There was no metal detectors. You basically walked straight in onto the plane, showed a ticket, didn't even have to verify anything. And it was because airlines were so protective of the customer experience. So they
Fascinating.
didn't want to impose metal detectors and infringe on sort of the customer's rights
Uh,
by having that security. And they actually protested, putting things like metal detectors in for as long as they could. And so what hijackers ended up doing was like choosing airlines that didn't have
Security.
metal detectors. Yeah, there was no police at the airport. It's a very different time, and obviously that changed then. And there was some sort of big moments that led to the change. But yeah,
It's
that's
fascinating
my
that
record this week.
it's fascinating that it took so long to change. Like they must have.
It was something like 130 or 160 hijackings happened over like a 4 year period
Yeah,
in the
right.
US. So
Did they then
you
go,
know,
huh? Maybe we are actually losing money on this, and maybe the public perception is changing, and we need to do something about it.
I think the reason that it changed was more about the threat of nuclear devastation
What?
to the US. Yeah, so
Oh, like
so
someone
they
coming
start to
along with a
worry.
bomb.
Yeah, so, but like it was so bad. There's 100, yeah, 130. I'm just looking now. But at one point, Cuba was such a popular destination that they had maps and like maps of like Havana airport for the pilots. So if it did happen, they knew how to like navigate, and you know there'd be instructions in the plane that said, please return this to the United States as soon as possible.
Jesus,
And at one point, the FBI even thought about building a fake Havana airport in Florida to trick hijackers into like flying back around.
that's a movie that needs to be made.
Look, there probably is, and they came up with all of these like crazy schemes to prevent hijacking rather than putting security in. And it was even things like making guests wear boxing gloves so they couldn't operate guns while they were flying.
Well, I we were talking about this before, and I tried to remember who, but I've heard a story from a friend who had a friend, that sort of thing, whose dad or granddad um, was like back in the day in this sort of time offered to be handcuffed to a hijacker for the remainder of a flight. Like they foiled this hijacking, and in compensation, this guy got for having to sit next to the hijacker for the with his handcuffed for the next 10 hours of his flight or whatever. He was given a first class around the world credit, and he held on to it for like 20 or 30 years and gave it to his daughter or granddaughter on their sort of for their honeymoon.
Hmm.
And the thing that blew me away was that the airline honored it. So like they had records going back going, yep, this is legit. Okay, well, you stopped one of our planes being blown up, and we'll give you a $15,000 ticket.
Yeah, there's some crazy aviation stuff out there. Like there was the one American airline that you could pay $1 million and have a lifetime of free flights,
Yeah,
and you just hear about people
the
smashing the
AAA.
system.
There's still a couple of them around. That is fascinating.
Yeah,
Like, and
so good.
they're in like constant lawsuits because it's like American
Yeah,
Airlines, and they're trying to stop them. Like, they got
yeah, yeah,
someone out
yeah.
of it recently because yeah, that's a topic for another day. But
Yeah, it's another.
anyway, I've
What have
been
you been
liking
liking?
something. Something that popped up in my recommended feed on YouTube. Um, it's kind of odd because
I can
Andy.
only imagine what pops up on your recommended feed on
Well, this is
YouTube.
it's odd for how banal it is. It's a video
Uh
called
huh.
"Life in Australia, Melbourne."
Oh,
We both live in Melbourne, Andy Green.
we do.
Other people, Melbourne, Australia, not Melbourne, Florida. Um, and this is a video from the Australian film collection. It was made in 1966, and it's part of like I don't know, it's a 20-minute sort of no words, but like just a video montage that sort of covers off 24 hours in Melbourne, and it sort of follows these various characters around, and it's sort of that 1960s social realism stuff about you see people in different lives, like one of them's a housewife, one of them works in a factory, one of them's an office worker, and it goes through this, the day in the life, and it's
Hmm.
quite cute how it's done. Like it's, but the really fascinating thing about it is seeing places that are very very familiar to you and me, and how radically different they are. Like you see milk carts being, horses delivering milk, and the docks in like the 60s, and all this sort of like the Holden factory in Broadmeadows, and these sort of parts of Melbourne that are very familiar to me, but have totally changed. And that's like my parents would have been like early teenagers at that time. So it's a weird little time capsule, and it's also impressive because it's in HD. They've
Hmm.
like obviously they didn't have HD digital footage back there, but they've upgraded it, and it's very very yeah, just really interesting. Just a really interesting look at how much things change in a fairly short time. I recommend it.
You are feeling very nostalgic this week, Felix.
Oh, yeah, I guess I am. I guess I am getting old.
All right.
You know
We'll
what'll pep
speak
me up?
a fiery chat with William Massena.
Yeah. Andy, our next guest is a legendary figure in the world of watches. You could call him
An icon.
an icon. You could call him a connoisseur. He's been around Swiss watches all his life, but people would likely know him from places like Timezone and maybe Antiquorum and Bonhams, even through to the GPHG. William Massena is his name, and he seems to have done it all. But more recently, he's been doing his own thing, and that's Massena Lab. But before we get to that, let's say hi to William. Hello, William. How are you?
Hi guys. Hi Andy. Hi Felix. How are you?
We're good. We're good. We're just sort of waking up our end of the world. How are you going over in New York?
Things are okay here. Not as bad as I think they let you guys believe in Australia or in Europe. New York is fine. It's more, it's much less issues than we had in the past. So we're kind of past the peak, and it's doing okay. No, the restaurants are still closed mostly, but we're doing okay.
Yeah, lovely. So it's great to have you on the show. Obviously, you've caught everyone's attention a couple of times over the last 12 months. As Felix mentioned, you've been around a really long time. For those who might not be aware of, who William Massena is, who is he and how did he fall in love with watches?
So I'm half French, half Austrian, but I grew up in Switzerland, in Geneva. I started loving watches very early on. Swiss are not big watch fan, contrary to what people believe, but I was. And I moved to the US when I was 18 to go to college. And I basically stayed in the USA, mostly in New York, for the last 35 years. And I've done many things in the watch world. I was a retailer at one point. I had two stores, one in New York and one in Miami. I ran Timezone. I was not the founder, but I was one of the early person on Timezone, and that was back in 1995. I was 26 years old, and there was barely an internet at the time. And then I was with Timezone nearly 25 years. I left Timezone last year.
Wow.
And Timezone was bought by Antiquorum, which is a big auction house in watch specialists in Switzerland. And after Antiquorum bought Timezone, I ran Antiquorum for about 3 years, and I left it to go back to the US. I was a bit tired of Geneva, and I want to come back to New York. So I left Antiquorum, but I continue running Timezone. And about 3.5 years ago, I definitely thought about starting a watch company. I wasn't exactly sure what I want to do, but I started Massena Lab because I want to do some watches with my friends and do certain things that I was thinking about for the last 20 years.
Yeah, interesting. So, that's sort of the potted history of like your resume, I guess. But at what point did you sort of get a watch and go, okay, these are a thing I want to have on my wrist and all around me for the next 30 or 40 years or whatever?
So it's kind of strange. I had my first watch and I was really into it for a while. I got a watch really young, and then I like any kid with a toy, I kind of enjoyed it. Then at 11, I asked for another watch, which is kind of weird. I really wanted a Seiko digital watch. And there was an exam. My parents said, if you pass this exam, if you have good grades, we'll get you the watch, which I did, and I got the watch. And then I came to the US and I wanted more watches. I wanted a Casio calculator. I wanted this, I wanted that. So there was always this thing. And then my parents were like, look, this is enough. If you want another watch, you have to work for it. So I two summer jobs took me, and I bought a Rolex at 16. They were
Wow.
much
Nice.
cheaper back then. But I worked at I worked at the Montreal Jazz Festival in 2 years in a row, 2 summers in a row. I sold T-shirts and the Jazz Festival program, and I made maybe 1,500 Swiss francs at the time, and
Cool.
saved the money. And I went to Bucharest and I bought an oyster quartz, which I still have. And then I didn't
very
have a
cool.
watch until, I don't know, maybe 10 years later. I think 1992, with my first paycheck, I went back and bought another watch and another watch and another watch, and it never stopped. I mean, since the early 90s, I think I bought maybe 10 watches, 15, maybe 20 watches a year on average.
Well,
I
up
haven't
until I
kept
got
all
the
of them,
year.
huh? Please.
Yeah. That first Rolex, that oyster quartz, did you wear it like every day, all the time, or was
Oh
it
yeah,
something special?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was my everyday watch. It was great. It's kind of funny. I went to the store and they had 2 watches I could afford. It was the oyster quartz of the Milgauss 1019, and because they were discontinuing the Milgauss and nobody wanted it. It was kind of big and nobody could understand really what it was for, and it was kind of big for me too. It had a plastic crystal, and the oyster quartz was also not discontinued, but kind of, discounted. And this had a sapphire crystal. And the lady told me at the counter, it was funny, Rolex was on the top floor at the time at Bucharest and Zurich. You had to go all floor up to the top floor of the store to see the Rolexes. And the old lady was an old lady. She told me, oh, with this, you can play tennis, you can do anything, you never break the watch. And she was right about it. And the other thing that was great, it doesn't look like a Rolex. So when you're a 16, 17-year-old kid with a Rolex, I mean, back then it was kind of different, but still, it was still a Rolex. And it looked like fake because you had the ticking quartz, the
Yeah.
integrated bracelet, and nobody ever bothered me with it. It wasn't a thing. And I think that's what I appreciated about the watch. And I still appreciate it. I wear it once in a while. It's kind of small for me now, but those shoots of me. I don't know if you guys know Sean Lee, who lives in Hong Kong. He's a big
Yeah.
collector,
Yeah.
and he is
Yeah.
also he runs
Blackbird.
Blackbird. Yes.
Yeah.
And Sean Lee is a childhood friend of mine. We went to school together.
Huh.
And Sean Lee took a picture of me back in the mid '80s at the school dance, and I'm the treasurer. I'm kind of charging people for getting in, and you can see me with the oyster quartz on it. It's kind of fun.
Wow. Pre-digital. And speaking of sort of that long history, I just want to chat a little bit about Timezone because that's where I would have first come across your name. I think now in 2020, a lot of our sort of listeners and people who are into watches more recently, their first point of contact for watch communities would be places like Facebook or Instagram. That certainly, when you started with Timezone, on everyone over the 20 years that you were in charge there, it would have been a very different place. Why was Timezone important?
For a lot of reasons. The first reason Timezone is so important is it's really the first place where people met and discussed watches on the internet. Nowhere else. I mean, literally, nothing else existed. There was alt.orology, but it was kind of a bulletin board, and nothing worked properly there. And Timezone was really the first place where we could exchange information about things. And I know it sounds kind of bizarre today, but first of all, I had no idea that there was so many watch collectors out there. I had no clue. I thought that I was kind of a weird geek and I was alone, liking watches, and nobody else liked watches like I did. And obviously, Timezone made me discover that there were a lot of people like me. The second thing is the exchange of information. I mean, before Timezone, nobody discussed in-house movement. I mean, that's something that today people talk about all day long. We knew that there were in-house movement. We knew that they existed, but we didn't think how important it was to some people and how it spread. Timezone helped spread that gospel about in-house movement. Obviously, spread the gospel about watches and small independent watchmakers. You wouldn't have Dufour today without Timezone, where Peter Chong wrote a big review of the for simplicity. And the success of Lange, you can say, was somewhat because of Timezone. I mean, a small part of it because people were able to chase those watches for small production right away from the four quarters of the world. Pricing also changed tremendously because of Timezone and others. When I say Timezone, we were the first, but there were a lot of others that came afterwards, like the Purist or What You Seek. But what we did and were pioneers is exchanging information about pricing. I mean, 30 years ago, a Spin Master in the US was 40% more money than in Europe. And I'm sure it was 50% more in Australia than in Europe. Today is a whole different story. Today, any of you guys can check the price of a Spin Master in any corner of the world within minutes, asking a friend. Or now you don't even need to do that because they put the pricing online. But 30 years ago, the visibility of this was really not high, and Timezone kind of opened up that for the consumers, for the collectors. And then we started to go to Basel, and that's like the big thing. When we started going to Basel and brands saw collectors, they never seen collectors, they saw journalists. They saw Joe Thompson. They didn't see William Massena. And we were kind of weird, for watch brands. I mean, they hated us. We were the internet. The internet was nasty, pornographic. That's all they thought of it. They thought that the internet was this thing that was going to last a couple of years and we're going to go back to the old world. I remember when the bloggers like Hodinkee and all those guys showed up and they had the red carpet. I had my picture, some Securitas guys had my picture at Basel to let me enter the booth.
Really? Which
because
booth?
I won't name names, but we were. When you go to Basel, you have this thing where you have to request to have the picture on the badge, like you're allowed to take photography. Well, this picture thing comes from back in the early internet when guys like me or others from Timezone will go to Basel and we'll take our cameras. At the time we had cameras, and we'll take pictures, and to forbid us, because Baselworld will allow us to be journalists, we were writing articles, but the brands were saying that because we're posting those pictures on the internet, they would be copied instantly. So they made sure that we were having the badge for the to write, to be journalists, because Baselworld organization, the MCH, was giving us the basically the journalist credentials, but they were making sure that we couldn't take pictures.
That's fascinating.
So bizarre.
To get an appointment was a whole story. I mean, we were basically getting appointments through retailers because we're buying with their clients. So the retailers wanted to have our opinion, and the retailers would bring us in the booth to look at watches with them. Yes, not with a journalist. I think I said the first time with journalists in 2005. Before that, I was usually with retailers or because I knew the president or the CEO of the brand. I mean, you had guys that were very early on with us. I mean, I'm talking the industry in general, but you had Gunther Blumlein, who was right away let us have access to everything. Biver also was, I mean, those guys, the Biver and the Blumlein were, very open-minded about this, but a lot of others were not. But I won't give names, but a lot of people that today treat any blogger with a lot of respect that they deserve anyway, as much respect as anybody else, were basically lobbying to get us kicked out of Basel.
Sorry, Felix, can we hit pause for a moment? I just need to top up.
What's in your cup?
Inglewood Coffee Roasters, of course. I've just finished my cup of their Ethiopian filter roast, which is perfect for my V60, but I think I might make a double espresso. This time I'll test out their Sunset Boulevard blend.
Yeah, good call. I'm busy chilling out with the quality of their Ethiopian filter at the moment. Refreshing bergamot notes, sweet and tropicale. What's not to like?
Yeah, so here's the deal. Use OT30, that's OT30, for 30% off your order at checkout. On top of that, Inglewood Coffee Roasters offer free shipping on all Victorian orders and Australia-wide when you spend over $50.
Head to inglewoodcoffeeroasters.com.au to place an order today. We will link that up. OT the podcast, fueled by Inglewood Coffee Roasters.
Let's get back to the show.
Like you say, bloggers, people are making up, publications, and if you've got an Instagram handle, you can now get into Baselworld pretty easily. What I want to kind of go back to is obviously Felix points out that time zone grading system and the kind of universal access to global prices has been a really important thing in sort of equalizing the market in a sense. And I mean, I've not been into watches as long as you have, but I've think back to 5-10 years ago when you sort of look and there'd still be price discrepancy. So that's a really awesome thing to iron out, and I know that it's still used today. The other kind of presence that you had on Timezone, which you're pretty public about, is you're a bit of an evil villain over there, a bit of a feared character at times.
Yes, very much so.
I've heard bits and pieces of sort of your take on it all and what your approach early on with the forums was, but I'd love to hear why you were kind of so feared.
I stayed away from the Patek forum. I didn't go there.
I'm a watch lover. I'm not a brand lover. I'm not a watchmaker lover. I'm a watch lover, and I found on Timezone, or for the simple reason that most forums are by brands, not by theme. I found that all of a sudden you have people that clutter together and start talking about the brands more than the watch. And there seems to be a worshipping of the brands, like the brands cannot do wrong. And I really dislike this. I mean, Patek is an amazing brand, but Patek makes a lot of shit. And it's not because Patek released a watch that we should all be there and saying that the watch is great. I think we should actually look at it and say this watch is maybe not as great as it's supposed to be. Why is Patek making I give you an example, the 5196, which is the Calatrava 3, with the small second. It's the first price watch, and it's a manual wind. It comes with a tiny little movement, and I found this for a $20,000 watch. I found this in 2020 to be absolutely not adequate for a brand like Patek. And I think people should mention this, and people should criticize this. I'm not saying the watch is ugly. I'm saying that the things are not what they're supposed to be for a brand of this caliber. And I think people get really upset. And all of a sudden I'm evil and I'm a bad guy because I dare touch their favorite brand or their favorite watch. Because the problem with this is that you write about something and you make a point, and the person who owns the watch it gets upset. And they get upset not for the rational of it. They get upset because you insulted the watch, that you insulted the wife. It's like people.
Well,
Go ahead, Andy.
I was also saying it's also something that they've invested in. Like they've spent $20,000 on this.
Yeah.
And someone on the internet's come along and said this is crap.
I know. I'm not saying it is crap. I'm saying that there should be more to it than just being a sticker and look at the sticker on it, and therefore because there's a sticker it should be revered, it should be worshipped. And I mean, you can buy a car tomorrow from certain brands, and it might be a lemon, it might be not the right model, and in 20 years people can look back and say, this car was an awful car for that brand. It happens. Another thing also you have to realize, and this is why really I got a lot of William is such a nasty person, is I thought very early on Timezone the investment aspect of watchmaking. I was one of the first guys to really go and mock people that were doing this. In the early 2000s, between maybe 2003 and the pop of the bubble of the 2008 when we had the financial crisis, people were storing 3970s in the safe in Asia, like they had gold in their hands, and it was like, it's kind of like what we're back to today. And the 3970 was trading at much higher price than today. The gold one was trading over $100,000. The platinum one was at 120, 150. Special dials were going for $250,000. The 5004, which is a split chronograph perpetual calendar, was going for $250,000. And people thought that we're going to go to the moon, and they didn't. I mean, they're basically a little bit lower today than they were 15 years ago.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry to interrupt, because this is on our list of things for us to get later on, but topics later. But you've touched on it now, the investment thing. What I find really fascinating is that watches as investments, prices, and I think we all agree with you on that. But we're in sort of the global recession. The world is, more or less crumbling around us, and Nautilus prices have remained stable despite all of this. Other sort of steel watches, it's pretty similar. Do you have a view on that? Do you understand what's going on, being in the game
Well,
for so long and sort of having that
I
banking background?
I happen to have a financial and economist background. I went to university for that. So yes, it's there's so much money, there's so much liquidity in the market. Banks are lending money now at 3% in the US. You can buy a house, or you can even get personal loans in the 3 to 4% range if you're a wealthy guy. And all of a sudden, people have access to a lot of liquidity and are basically buying assets, thinking that these assets are going to help them edge inflation, because there's for sure going to be some inflation because of this liquidity in the market. And I think this is the rationale. People are trying to rationalize the purchase, and they're being reinforced by the price going up. If you buy a Rolex today, a retail, and you can sell it tomorrow for 50% more, why not do it? I mean, you're rationalizing it, and you can tell yourself that maybe a Breguet will do the same thing, or whatever, an Omega watch. And obviously, if a lot of people rationalize like this, you have more and more demand. You have more and more demands, prices go up. I think that it feeds on itself. It's a bit like why is the stock market up or stable while the world is going down the drain with epidemic and pandemics and social problem and issues in the US. Meantime, the stock market is doing fantastic. And I think it's the fact that people are looking at this liquidity and are saying, especially the stock market, you have a lot of people feeding on the fact that they're going up, and it's the same for watches. Meantime, you have a lot of people pushing them as investment too. I mean, you don't forget, you don't have a lot of guys saying today. A lot of brands, including brands, but also auction houses, a lot of guys are talking about watches as investments, which is something that 20 years ago nobody talked about. It was just starting.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And just before we get on to sort of Massena Lab, I was wondering, do you think this sort of conversation around watches as investments, is that a good thing or a bad thing for brands like Patek and Rolex that are sort of the hot tickets in that space?
I don't think it's a good or bad thing. I think that this is the argument they're using now. Maybe Rolex and Patek is much more subtle about it. Rolex has a great track record in terms of auction prices, but and people kind of look at this, and it's true that Rolex and Patek do have maintained the value better than other brands, so they're much more subtle about it. I'm thinking about lower brands that have not lower, but brands that maybe don't have that track record is using the investment line a little bit more, and I think this is dangerous. I buy a watch, I look at my exit strategy, I'm telling myself it's like a car. I'm going to lose 40% when I sell it. Even when I go and I go to a store and I buy a GMT, and they're friends of mine, and I've been on the waiting list for 3 years, I'm thinking that GMT is going to lose 40%. I'm still like this old school guy who thinks that way. What's my what's the worst case scenario? And I think guys putting their name on list at Jaune, FP Jaune for Chronomètre Bleu, which I think retails for $25,000. They know it sells in the 50,000 range, and they think they're going to do this as a living, basically.
Yeah,
it's a great answer. That's a great answer. I take the same approach as well, mainly because I'm pretty rough with my watches anyway. So even if I do get a steel GMT at retail,
you're going to scratch it within 5 minutes.
And trust me, I have.
Well, Andy, don't forget there's laser now. So anything you scratch, laser can repair.
That's what I tell myself. That's what I told myself when I my BLNR met a towel rack about 2 weeks after I got it and put a nice dent in one of the lugs. So
yeah, it doesn't have to go into the sales condition. TZ condition 99.
Lasers.
No, the best you can do with TZ is 95, because 99.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We say it's a dealer can have 99. It's like never worn.
Yes.
Brand new.
So let's talk now, I think, about Massena Lab, which is your sort of newest venture in some ways.
The Evil
Um,
Lab.
yeah, you've it's got quite a manifesto on when you hit the website, which we'll link up, of course. It says, I'm sure you're aware with this, William. Massena Lab was conceived from the desire to promote the fine art of independent watchmaking in an age of saturated mass production. That's a sort of a good opening line. Can you tell us in what Massena Lab's all about and what it's for?
God, I hope this is not going to come back and haunt me, this manifesto. But uh, I,
It will.
yeah, for sure it will. Uh, I, I when I wrote this, I wrote this really because I was doing the first watch with Habring, and I thought Habring, for people who are not familiar, Habring is a little Austrian brand run by two people. It's called Habring Two or Habring Square. They're run by Maria and Richard Habring in the eastern part of Austria, and they make maybe 150 watches a year. And I looked at this and I was like, a guy like Richard, who worked for IWC, worked for
Mm.
Lange, and make incredible watches. He has won, I think, 3 or 4 times something at the Grand Prix in Geneva. Needs a bigger audience. He needs somebody who maybe is making a watch that would be a little bit more appealing to people, and I would promote his brand to a new audience. And that was the idea. The idea was to do limited edition watches with uh, independent watchmakers, small one, and just sell them to my friends first and to people on the internet and social media. Keeping low production, low limited edition, and trying to use maybe some vibes, some influence from vintage watches, because I'm one of those guys. I like as much vintage as I like modern watches, so I want to put both together.
And where did it really start for you? What was the sort of first piece to come out of the lab?
So the first one wasn't from the lab. The first one was from Timezone. We did
Mhm.
Richard Maya and I did the anniversary piece for the 20th anniversary of Timezone. So Timezone used to be owned by this guy called Richard Page. It was first created in Singapore, but Richard Page bought it, and Richard was a retailer in San Francisco, so he was making. This is back in 1998. He was
Mm.
making limited edition with different people like Minerva, because Minerva still existed at
Hmm.
the time. He was, and I thought that it would be a good idea for the 20th anniversary to revive this. So I went to Antiquorum and I say, guys, I want to do this watch. I want to do it with Habring because I thought Richard was the ideal candidate for this, and we did this watch together, and I had a lot of fun doing it, really a lot of fun doing it. And this first watch was a chronograph, and I want to do it like a old Longines chronograph from the 40s. And when we sold the watch with May 20, some people come back to me and they say, wait, it's an $8,500 watch. It's a bit expensive for me. I would have liked something around $5,000. And I was like, oh yeah, we should do something like this for people that cannot really afford the $8,000 to $10,000 watch. So
Mm.
I went back to Richard and I say, for the 21st anniversary, let's do something else.
Mm.
And we did that watch that you may have seen, which is a sector dial watch.
Yep.
And when we did this, I realized that I really want to do that I want to talk to other people, and I want to do other watches with other watchmakers. And
Yeah,
this is where the idea came.
and I think it's really interesting. So you've worked with. It must be sort of easy or tempting to go down just doing that sort of that vintage Habring approach, which you've done a few with now. But you've also worked with most recently LePay with that really cool looking T Rex, Unimatic, and that
That
was
was cool.
that again the Unimatic that was a very almost conceptual take on a sort of neo vintage diver. How do you choose who to work with and sort of what the approach is, I
Um,
guess?
So Lepe slash Max was an easy choice. It
Yeah.
really went over pizza with Max. I shared a pizza with Max last year, about a year ago actually, and we talked. And I was working on a project with another watchmaker, and I was having a really hard time. And Max said, "Why don't we do a project together?" And Max wanted to work with bronze because of my first watch on Massena Lab with Habring was this bronze sector dial, and I
Mm.
want to work with bronze too again. And so we discussed it, and we came up with this idea with the people from Lepe, and that's basically this is really out of friendship, I think, when Max and I talked, and Lepe got involved, and we had a couple of ideas how we want to age the bronze, because I really want to age it, and that's how we came up with it. This was pure friendship. This is Unimatic was kind of different. I Unimatic did a limited edition with Mr. Porter,
Yep.
and Mr. Porter in the US, I bought a couple of things for them. So I received the email, and I received the email. They were trying to sell me the watch, I guess. When I saw the watch, I had never heard of Unimatic, to be honest with you. I loved it, and I really liked the watch. And I approached the people at Unimatic, Giovanni and Simone. Out of the blue, I sent them an email. I said, "Look, my name is William Massena. This is my website. I really love what you guys are doing. I love your sense of aesthetic. There's definitely something there that I like. Those guys are more designer. They come from, more of a designer background and a watch background.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
and I could see those elements that I think were very resonating with me. And I flew in Milan, and we talked, and I gave them my ideas, and we agreed that it would be good to work something together. And I think the watch came out pretty nice. I mean, it sold in less than a minute, so I hope it was a success.
I love that. I love that. So my question to you, William, is do you, and I'm asking for a friend here, but how do you do a good collab when it comes to kind of co-designing a watch in a scenario like that? Do you have any
Um,
secret tips?
it's I first of all, you need to have your thing. You need to have Supreme have their thing. The thing is, they put the Supreme logo on everybody's else product. You want a Rimowa Supreme, they put a Supreme logo on the Rimowa suitcase. You want a Louis Vuitton bag Supreme, they put a Supreme logo on a Louis Vuitton bag. My stick is I'm going to find maybe a vintage inspired watch, and I go to a brand which I think will work with this vintage inspired watch, and I say, hey, let's mash both together. Let's make the vintage version of your watch. What if Max Busser uh, was a 1930s or 1910 clock maker, and we found one of your clock today, what would it look like? It would be in
Mm.
bronze, it will have age, it will have some patina, it would be an homage to the T-Rex, because the T-Rex the first T-Rex was found in 1911 by this guy called Barnum Brown, and we need to work the color, what we will look like today, and that's basically what I do. Unimatic is the same thing. When I pitch them the story, I say, imagine Unimatic is a brand that was founded by two Italian designers in the 40s that loved
Mm.
Panerai, that loved the new Rolex that just came out, and they were inspired by the new Rolex and Panerai. What would they do? That's the way I saw it. And I went to them and I said, Unimatic that would be original, that would still have all your DNA, and will look like this, in my opinion. And we thought that this was, the aging of the brown dial would be a cool little aspect. They fought me a lot over the bezel. They didn't want to do
Mm.
the right triangle with the bezel. So you have
Oh,
to fight
interesting.
with them. You have to argue with them, on the bezel. You have to really go into the details with the watchmakers or the designers. You cannot
Yeah.
tell them, hey, I'm William Massena. Can you do me a limited edition? And then make something for you and you like it. Yeah, a lot of brands can do that for you. But I want my thing, and I want them to agree that it should be our thing. It's like having a child. It's not one person who has a child, it's two person. Two people have to have the kids and agree and nurture that child.
Yeah, sure. So we'll talk about your latest child in just a second, but while we're talking about collaborations, I just want to get your take on this sort of it's not really a trend anymore, but brands like Hodinkee and Revolution have been sort of moving into that collaborative co-branding
Hmm.
space quite strongly in the last few years. What do you think about this and its impact on sort of watches and the community in general?
I think it's good, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I think that both Waco and with Revolution and Ben with Hodinkee are doing a very good job with that. It opens the brand to a new world, and the world of the community that those guys have created. Um, Ben has definitely created a huge community with Hodinkee, and by having collabs with IWC, for example, or even Swatch, he opens this community to those products that they may not have been really interested in. I mean, Ben started with Max. I think his first collab was with Max. He did a clock, or he did the an LM1, I think, in steel, and then he went
Mm,
down, and he went all the way down to a Swatch. So did the guy who buys the LM1, will he buy a Swatch? Maybe not, but maybe he didn't even look at Swatch. Maybe he would have not known that Swatch were making automatic watches. And I think that's
mm,
the cool thing about it. I Way at the same time did great thing. I think the undone watches are great. I
Mm.
mm.
think I don't know if you've seen they did two, I think, collab with Undone on the Brigade
Yeah,
Type
yeah.
20. I
Yep.
thought these were really. I would have loved to make those. I think they did a great job doing that watch. He also did. I bought one of his. I bought the Bell and Ross one for some reason. I really like the one he did with Bell and Ross.
The honey
The
badger
belly
or something
tanker.
like that.
Yeah,
Oh, the belly
Oh, the
in
tanker.
belly
Yeah,
tanker.
bronze.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did it in bronze with a gold dial type and brownish sub dials, and this was right before I launched my own, and I bought
Mm,
his. I want to see how he did it, and I think he did a wonderful job.
that was a good one.
There's we obviously there's a lot of investments that have to be made in both marketing and product and things, but I think that in certain way the brands that do this are taking a risk as much as the person doing it, and the risk is can be big because it can fail completely. The market may really hate it, and
Mm.
but at the same time you can open your world and your horizon to others that may not have been
That,
interested in your brand to start with.
that's a great point to jump into the next and kind of main reason we have you on. Speaking of risk, we're here to talk about your new Massena Lab piece, the Uni-Racer. Now, this is a not a co-branded release. This doesn't have. This wasn't done with collaboration with anyone else but yourself. You do have a media partner, which is Hodinkee, who we just talked about.
Hmm.
Can you explain what this piece is? What inspired it? What can we expect? It's probably sold out by now, but that's okay.
So I hope and I don't hope. I tell you why. First, Hodinkee is going to be a retailer on this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I So the Uni-Racer is inspired from a watch that was made by Universal Geneve in Universal Geneva in the 60s, between 63 and 65. I wish that I could have gone to Universal Geneve and asked them to do it with me. That would have been my first choice. But Universal Geneve is not exactly doing watches right now. So I I decided that basically I should do it myself, and I should do it as well as if I had a, a brand to work with. And it took me 2 years to do it. It's been more than 2 years. We went over every freaking details that you can think of. We changed the watch a little bit. We made it bigger. We made it. We obviously have a new movement in there, but basically the rest of it, besides the size and the movement, is basically exactly the same. We worked on the hands like crazy. The hands are very famous for that watch because the white dial watch has hands that reflect a dark blue and some
Mm.
angle is black, like a polished black, and I really want to do that. Just to do the hands took us a year to be able to find the finishing that was similar. And there's a technical reason why it was so hard, but basically, I want to make a watch that I would be proud of to own myself. I wanted to have the Uni compacts. And today, if you want that watch from Universal Geneve, it's $35,000. And I'm a big guy, and it would be too small on my wrist because it's 35 millimeters. So 35,000 US dollars for a 35 millimeter watch that is hard to find. I thought it was kind of something that was for me, a good target to try to not reissue, not to do an homage, but to basically collab with myself.
Mhm.
And I basically created that watch that way with a
Yeah,
lot
so
of
it's
love.
obviously
I'll tell you that.
yeah, yeah, you can tell it's very meticulous, and going off the photos that you sent through, it looks fantastic. It's I am really fascinated with your kind of reason for doing this, and sort of yeah, UG's not making they're not making watches anymore. You can't exactly go buy go talk to them and collaborate with them, and as you said, the price point of an original is
Prohibitive.
probably 12
Yeah.
times what the retailers is. With this, I guess, and this is a question that is going to throw back 2 decades to the early forum days, but is this something similar in, like, does this have a similar place in the watch world as, say, a Gevril Tribeca, that sort of Paul Newman inspired watch that came out in the 1990s?
Um, I hope not. And not that I think the Gabriel was actually it's Gabriel, but I hope not. I try. First of all, I'm not going to do as many quantities as they did, but
Mhm.
at the same time, if you want, the idea is not to copy them. The idea is it's not even to do an homage. The idea is, hey, this is a modern. This watch could be as modern as any chronograph from Rolex is today. I mean, I would not have done the watch if Universal Geneve was doing that watch today. Would be doing a modern version of the Uni compacts.
Yeah,
I
fair,
did
fair,
it
fair, fair.
more as a think of it more as a student because it's my first watch. An artist student who is at a famous museum and is trying to make a rendering of a famous painting, maybe, or maybe not a
In,
so famous painting, maybe a cult painting that a lot of people like and enjoy, and is making that rendering. Okay, I did it 400 times, but that's basically the idea. The
so
idea is
Yeah.
in the auction catalog, would you be a follower of Universal Geneve?
I in the auction catalog, I hope to be. I could have used Unicompacts. It was
Yeah.
I could have used the word Unicompacts. I may do it later. I haven't. I I I I thought of it. I really I'm prepared for this with the market. People saying, "Oh, this is like a copy of a watch that was made."
Mm.
I I try to make it maybe with a little bit more of love, of attention to details, maybe than the original. But it's this is not going to be my business. My business is not to do that watch over and over again.
Mm.
I will. I think if it works, I may do different version and my different take on that watch. Maybe I will. I will make it more of a Massena watch and less of a Universal Geneve watch. Maybe going forward. But I think that I had to do the original first before I start playing games with it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it
Okay.
does, and I only brought up the comparison just to tease you a little bit, because I know you've
No, but
probably thought about the different questions you'll get.
Andy, I think that this is a very valid question, and I think I should be I should be
Ready?
open about this, and that's the whole idea about Massena Lab is it's not like I'm not saying, hey guys, this is my original design. I've shown
Mm.
this watch to a lot of people, and they have no idea about the big eye. They're not familiar with that. Everybody think the watch is amazing and looks great, and a lot of people in the industry are not familiar with the big eye. I think it's
Mm.
mostly collectors and people people down on journalists that are more familiar with the big eye. And I'm not running away from that.
Mm.
I'm assuming it. I'm kind of proud of it. I took the big eye and I kind of tried to redo it, definitely. But I will not. That won't be my stick with Massena Lab. I will not be always redoing a watch. I may do more watches. I have to admit, there's more stuff coming that I hope will, please people. But I will try to make the thing evolved pretty rapidly.
Amazing, and I'm sure that there's a parallel that I can't think of in the automotive industry as well that kind of matches up really nicely with this, and like I think we all agree this is a really interesting kind of offering at where you've priced it. Which over to you, Felix. You've got some questions.
Yeah. So I think you've sort of touched on this, which might have answered my question a little bit about, we might see more sort of versions of this model, but it's priced, like you said, well, it's about 3,495 USD. It's limited to 400, so there's 200 of each dial. And it was, as you said, sold on Hodinkee. And I say sold in the past tense because I'm comfortable. We're recording this before it's released, but I'm comfortable saying by the time this airs, you're not going to be able to get one from Hodinkee.
Should we set one aside, Felix?
I mean, maybe. Did you consider
Be a good
making it?
investment.
Did you consider making it regular production to sort of give people what they want?
But at the same time, it goes back to what Andy just talked. I'm not in the business of redoing other people's watches and trying to pass them as my own and sell them until the end of time. It's really, here I am. It's my first project. I'm doing a batch of 400 watches. This model will evolve, I think. I haven't really decided yet, but I have a couple of ideas in mind, and that's it. And those, homage to the unique compacts are going to be gone. And I think that's kind of the cool thing about it is they will be collectible on their own.
100%. And this is sort of throwing back to when we chatted a little bit before about that sort of the problems around hype and selling things for premium and watches as investment. Have you become part of the problem, William?
My best friend who knows nothing about watches knows that I've been working on that watch, and he saw it, and he bought one, and obviously he said to me, I know nothing, tell me about the watch. And I explained it to him, the unique compacts and all this stuff, and he was like, oh yeah, it's like Andy Warhol taking the picture of Elvis and printing it 500 times and selling it for $1 million each. And I kind of like the parallel. It's you're just printing money. I'm like, no, not really, but I wish that was true.
I'm sure there's a lot of work that went into kind of even redesigning and reimagining a watch, decades and decades later, and putting a modern movement in, and even down to finding parts and hands.
Yeah,
and all of
so
that
we it's very difficult in the sense that when you make your own watch, on your own design, you can settle, right? The guys can come back to you and say, the guys who make the hands can say, we cannot make those hands. And then you're like, okay, well, we're going to make the hands the way you can do it. My glass, for example, my plastic glass, it's not a cheap Chinese glass. It's a Swiss-made plastic SLE glass. And there's only one other brand that do this. It's Omega. But I want to make it even better. You cannot scratch it. It's nearly unscratchable like glass. It's like sapphire, and it makes the watch super light, super comfortable on the wrist. But it was very hard to have the glass be water resistant enough with my case. But I made those guys work it. This is the kind of thing where I could have settled and say, okay, screw it, let's put a sapphire glass on this that will look like a plastic glass. But I really wanted the plastic glass. My hands were a nightmare. You would see, I don't know if you can see on the pictures I sent you, but I did the buckle the old-fashioned way. The box was thoroughly, this is not like something that we thought of, hey, let's copy a unique compacts and be done with it. We settle for, you have a lot of homage watch. I'm thinking about a brand that I have a watch I really love what they did called Elston. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They did an homage to the Blancpain diving watches. I think it's Elston or Elston. HELSON or
Helson. Sorry, yes.
Helson, yes.
Yep.
They did that homage, they did the chronograph and the diver watch.
Mm.
and they look great for $600. They have ETA movements that were, I mean, I'm talking maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe
Yeah,
more
sure.
than that. I thought they did great. They did fantastic. And when those guys did this, I have a feeling it pushed Blancpain to come back with a diving watch with an air command with the original 50 fathom that looks like the original 50 fathom. He kind of pushed the brands to reissue. And in certain ways, I hope that Universal Geneve looks at my watch and says, "Shit, we should do that ourselves."
Right.
And in certain ways, I would be very happy if this happens. It will prove that my 400 watches, that's why I will not make more,
Yeah.
have pushed a brand to come back and do what we all want, Universal Geneve watches, the
Yeah.
Yeah.
old-fashioned way.
I'm sure
And
you
it's
maybe know a
feasible.
few venture capitalists to make that happen.
Yeah.
this is
Uh,
this is the
but
seed money for the takeover of UG. This is going to raise the raise
but that's the
raise
idea,
enough money.
it's kind of, I mean, the idea is not this, but I like to shake the tree and say, and I'm going to do more limited edition of other brands, stuff that they have not done, and they don't want to do with me, because if they want to do it with me, I'll do it with them, obviously. But if the brand is dead, or if the brand doesn't want to do it with me, I'll do it myself. uh, and 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 I think that this is the way it can maybe uh, push the certain people to act and to start doing things that they should be doing, that the market is asking for.
Yeah, there's certainly an opportunity there, and I looking at the again looking at these sort of two pieces you've got. I'm really liking the Panda Doll. I think that's my favorite, and I'm confident that they're gonna sell out. And we've talked about the other collaborations, which you've done over the last few years, and as you say, you're sort of the supreme in the mix. I think bringing that extra spice to these sort of various brands. Which brings me to a point, and it comes back to something you said earlier. But you have a hard time with people that say that they're in love with brands or that sort of have this brand allegiance. Not only have you partnered with Hodinkee to sort of retail this, and they've got a huge following and love for them, but I think it's safe to say there's a lot of people out there that love Massena Lab as a brand and buy into that and buy into what you do, regardless. How does it sort of feel to have such loyal followers and loyal supporters that will just kind of back you so passionately, with knowing what you know about sort of and what you said earlier, but also your sort of background in as a community member before kind of getting into the industry?
Well, it's a very good question, Andy, and I really thought of that actually. That's a bit the reason why the company at Massena Lab is kind of weird. We have collabs. I'm now
Mm-hmm.
launching my own product, and you will see that I have basically planned watches for the next 3 years. There'll be a lot of different things with different looks. I don't want to be known for a certain look. I really want to open watches to more people. I have guys that like everything I make, and at the same time I kind of appreciate that, so I can introduce them to other type of watches. I mean, a guy who I have people I bought everything that I've made, everything,
Mm.
Mhm.
whether the Maxwell clock, whether it's a Unimatic, whether it's the Habring, and this Massena Lab, they bought them all. And those guys, in certain way, I think I'm opening the horizon to different type of aesthetic, different type of philosophy about watchmaking. Um, I love chronometry. I mean, this is something I will explore very soon. How to make all super precise watches from like the 60s, when chronometry was something important, but was not, a super expensive watch. There's a lot of things like this that I want to experience and learn myself, and basically share my experience with others by selling them the watch.
Yeah.
Um, but and at the same time, I won't be I hope not to be a brand, that in the sense that it would be always the same aesthetic. I hope that to a certain extent, after a while, somebody's gonna be like, "Oh my god, I hate that watch, William. What do you think here?" But another
Well,
brand new bunch of collectors will like it.
but even having your involvement on a project or having it come through the lab, I mean, that's a brand in itself. And I think maybe when you're doing things the right way, it's okay. And I can see, and it's not on mass and it's not on huge volume. You're not doing a million watches a year and people blindly following everything that you do, but maybe you're just making all the right moves so far. And I certainly agree. I think across the price points that you've played in, it is a very approachable kind of area within the watch community. If you're talking about sort of Unimatic, I remember sort of seeing that come up on my Instagram feed. Maybe it was last year, and kind of being really impressed. And then sort of by the time I'd swiped up to buy, it was sold out. But I think it's really cool. I think the kind of product segment that you're playing in is awesome.
Thank you.
Well, I think we need to wrap this up sort of soonish, but I've got a few more questions that while we've got you on the line, I can't not ask you. The first one is about fashion, William. You've been doing this fashion. You've been sort of wearing watches and collecting watches for long enough to see fashions come and go, like, two-tone, size, all this sort of stuff. Do you embrace it, or do you sort of try and avoid it?
That's a good question again. I try to be a contrarian in the sense that I try to buy things that people are not looking at. In my collecting, especially for expensive watches, I like to buy stuff that are not really of people interest right now. For example, the out of fashion that I like, that I think appeal to me aesthetically, for the simple reason that you can buy them cheap. The watches that you can buy today for very little, and they were very expensive when they came out. Tourbillons that from Daniel Roth, or there are things like this that people don't really look at, and they're all buying their Nautilus 5711. Yeah, I bought a Nautilus 5711, but that's when it came out 15 years ago. I have a tendency not to follow the herd in terms of buying as a collector. So I'm really not fashioned for this. Now, for Massena Lab, I have to admit that I have a tendency to follow the herd in the sense that right now, for example, I think that there's this big return to reedition and things like this. And to a certain extent, I'm doing the same thing. I'm working on that reedition. And on the Massena Lab, I think that I hope I'm going to evolve in taste too, that I'm not going to be always doing what's in fashion. It happens that right now I am following fashion, but I hope that it's not going to be like this all the time, or that maybe I will evolve with fashion. It's very hard, you influence and you have to sell them. When you buy a watch, you're buying it for yourself. When you create a watch, you're creating for others. So there is this tendency to maybe follow fashion more when you sell and create, and you make a financial commitment to basically invest in that product and sell it to others. So yes, here maybe I'm more following fashion. I may follow more fashion, but as a collector, the exact opposite. Right now, I'm buying stuff that nobody wants. Basically, I am not interested in buying Jaune. FP Jaune is a good friend of mine. I've been buying FP Jaune watches for many years. I haven't bought an FP Jaune watch in a while now because everybody wants one, and I have no interest in that.
Have you worn them?
Good answer.
Yes, of course. Yeah. I wear them all the time. I don't post them so much on my Instagram, but sometimes I do. But I wear them. Yeah. It's I wear them. Maybe I am more discreet about them when I wear them, but yes, I do still enjoy them. Yes, sometimes I sell them
Good
too.
answer.
Shocking.
Sometimes you have to sell them when you look at what people are paying for certain things that you think is a bit out of whack with reality of what the watch is, because you had it on your wrist for 10 or 15 years.
We've got some stickers we're going to have to send you, William. Our stickers are for Flippers stickers with our iconic dolphin bursting out of the ocean. you've made the cut. All right, next question. Another kind of hot take on the industry. With Basel sort of well and truly fallen, obviously COVID forcing every sort of brand and industry, but we're talking watches to pivot. What do you think the watch industry specifically is facing over the next 5 to 10 years? From a kind of bird's eye view sense?
I think that COVID is showing to the industry that maybe this is what they want. Having each brand seems to have a little bit of their week of release, and everybody concentrate on that brand. They spread it out over the year. You have the week Rolex, and we all talk about Rolex, and you have Patek, we all talk about Patek, and so on. And I think the brands might like this, and they may stick to this as going forward. I wouldn't be surprised if they do this. I personally really miss meeting people. I miss meeting bloggers, I miss seeing people from the brands discussing ideas. I think this is very important. We're social animals. We are monkeys. We need to compare each other. We need to look at each other's face, touch each other's face, and in certain ways, I miss this. But from purely a marketing standpoint, I think for the brands, it's much better that way. Release your watches, it costs much less money. You have your week in the sun with the press. Everybody talks about your watch that week, right? You go on Watchville, or you go on your favorite blog, and you'll find whatever you want on that brand, and it will be the same everywhere. But in certain ways, it makes us a herd, and journalists won't have a chance to go to Basel and find the next cool brand. Like Massena Lab could be like, somewhere in Baselworld, and like some guys from Australia could run into me and never heard of the brand and decide to talk about it. That this is the kind of thing. Without Basel, I don't think I would have ever met Felix. I mean, it's kind of weird. We need this at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. And sort of, I think a question that sort of parallels that in some ways. What do you think about the state of watch collecting as like a practice, I guess, in 2020 and at a time of Instagram and the weird sort of retail space we're in at the moment?
I think it's growing. It's still growing, which is a good sign. At the same time, there are issues that the brands are definitely suffering right now. I think it's growing, but not the way exactly what the brands expect. It's more like where the smaller guys, the independent, expected it. I think people are more interested in a watch for themselves now, maybe, or a watch to brag about on Instagram. And the brands are not very familiar how to deal with this. The Swiss are very slow people to react to things, and people want to brag on Instagram. Today, Instagram is where people want to brag about their watch collecting, right? Because you cannot go to a restaurant, you cannot go out and social with people. So basically, people are buying brands that they can brag about, and you can brag about brands that others cannot buy. So you see that there's this weird thing going on where it's going well for independents, for smaller guys, and it's not doing so well for the brands. And that's going to be an issue going forward because the Swiss are so slow to react to certain things. And then you have obviously Rolex, Patek, who are considered investment pieces or whatever, and have their own world and have people know or think that they're never going to lose their money buying that, so they're kind of different. But the rest of them, I'm very worried for the groups. I'm very worried for Richemont, and I'm very worried for Swatch. The independents, much less worried, and that wasn't the case 10 years ago. I tell you that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? They're much more robust and nimble. Well, nimble when everyone's pivoting and kind of got to make quick moves, and they're not tied down to 5-year contracts with MCH Group, etc. All right. So speaking of those big brands or independents, have you ever been tempted to work for someone like Richemont Group or one of your independent watchmaking friends? Felix and I were chatting, and surely you've been approached. You probably get asked a couple of times.
I could see you I could see you at AP, like the head of patrimony and something.
Michael does a great job. Michael is a friend of mine for the last 20 years.
No shade.
I am not going to go after Michael's job.
You could though.
No, he's much better than I am at that job. Trust me. I've been approached by brands to do things, but never. I've done stuff for brands. Obviously, I've done some consulting for brands. I don't think. First of all, it would mean moving to Switzerland. If it's not, doing sales in a country like the US, being a brand president in the US, which I have no reason to want to do. it would be moving to Switzerland, and I'm not sure I'd be so happy moving to Switzerland. There's a lot of politics involved. I speak the language. I really know what's going on behind the scene, and it's not really something where I think I would be happy about.
Okay, that's a good question, or good answer rather. Another thing that I sort of thought, it's a bit timely. The GPHG sort of lists are coming out, and it's a bit of a strange year for they sort of restructured it this year. Of course, you're sort of quite well known as one of the regulars on the jury.
Mm-hmm.
In a short answer, how do you judge an award-winning watch?
It's very difficult because you don't have everybody in the list. So you have a lot of people you've never seen before. So when you are looking at something on a computer screen, which we do as jury, we used to do in the past for the first round, you have to basically use your knowledge, your intelligence, your eyesight to figure out which watch you want to pick. But it's very weird, and you always come out with a different weird outcome. It's even weirder this year because you had 300 people voting. So I think but at the same time, 300 people, you have less mistakes maybe because it comes out. I think the crowd gets a little bit smarter maybe than 15 guys, where one or two guys may screw up and then some brands that shouldn't be there gets there.
Interesting.
I think the Grand Prix, the big brands should go back and compete. I think everybody should stick together and help each other and do it for fun more than anything else.
Yeah. Look less at the risk, more of the
yes,
the positives.
But at the same time, look at the Oscars. Nobody gives a shit about the Oscars. Excuse my French, but today in the US, nobody gives a shit about the Oscars. Nobody cares about all those Emmys and all those award shows.
Yeah.
So, at the same time, I may understand why the brands don't really want to get involved because they may lose and they don't want to be losers.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
Good answer.
Yeah, no, that's answers the question very nicely.
All right, my last question before Felix brings it home. I know you're a well-documented fan of the Rolex OP. Obviously, not that long ago, some new colours came out. Which dial are you choosing for Christmas this year?
Good question. I hesitate. I like the yellow for some reason. I like the green too. I think that because of my age and what I look like, I think I'll go with the green. I think I'll buy my wife the coral red one, that orangey red, maybe in 34 millimeter. But I would buy myself the green one. I like the green one. I think it's a great watch.
Very good answer, Felix.
Andy, you should buy the green one too.
I'm thinking candy pink, William.
Really? Candy pink? Not Tiffany blue, huh?
Nah, I think if you're gonna, the blue's close enough to be. I think the blue's pretty out there. And if you're gonna go out there, you may as well just go to the candy pink, which is the one I really want.
I'd go to
Felix.
pink or
What
blue.
about you?
Pink or blue?
Pink or blue?
Yeah, I've already got yellow. I've already got a bright yellow dial.
Yeah, but a Rolex bright yellow dial is kind of cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool. It'll be cooler in yellow gold.
Yeah, what already exists.
Yeah.
The champagne dial.
Yeah, true. So before we wrap up, I've got one last question, and it's possibly the hardest, the most challenging question of the this. I guess we call this an interview. What have you been doing to pass the time or to enjoy that has very little to do with watches, to switch off?
Netflix, obviously, reading. I try to walk every day. My wife pushes me to go walk every day, which I'm trying to do when I don't have crazy Zoom meetings and stuff. But yeah, basically a lot of reading and a lot of Netflix watching. I'm as boring as everybody else, and I try to exercise basically.
And what have you been watching? I want specifics.
I got a good one for you. I just finished something. I don't know if it's on Australia Netflix, but if it is, I really enjoyed it. Maybe because I'm 50 years old. It's Cobra Kai. Have you guys heard of Cobra
Yeah,
Kai?
yeah. From Karate Kid.
Yes, it's silly and stupid, and I really enjoyed it. I watched both season in like a week. They're like 35 minutes shows.
Episodes, yeah.
It's yeah, Cobra Kai's never dies. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I think I finished it last week, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I recommend it to anybody. It's a low bro, but it's really fun.
Love that.
Well, I think that for me is the main take out of this is that William Massena, erudite scholar on connoisseur collector par excellence, is a big fan of the Karate Kid.
You'll have to get your black belt out, Felix.
You guys weren't born when the Karate Kid came out.
No, that's true. I remember it though, and I've got a 5-year-old son at the moment, and where my partner and I are debating whether or not we should show it to him. But I think it's a few years off.
Yeah, it's a few. I was in my teens when it came out. It was like the movie, you know.
Yeah. So it's been a real pleasure chatting to you and sort of hearing about your new projects and sort of getting some insights about your take on this very interesting time in the industry at the moment. So thank you very much for spending some time. Congratulations on the new launch, and we can't wait to see what you've got coming up with next.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for having me on your show. I'm very honored, and I was very happy to talk with you guys.
Not a problem. Of course, we'll link everything up so people listening can find out everything that we've talked about.
Amazing.
Great.
Okay.
Felix, that was a excellent chat with William Massena. Certainly opened my eyes to the man, and yeah, really interesting. I think we should get him back on at some point to get more sort of thoughts from him. As always, thank you to this week's sponsor, Nomos Glashütte. Go check out the new Nomos Lambda.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, thank you, Inglewood Coffee Roasters. Don't forget to use OT30 at checkout for 30% off.
Bam.
And we'll plug the code into the notes as well. But support our coffee. Support our coffee.
Support
Felix,
our coffers too. I mean, let's be honest.
Coffers,
supporting
yeah.
our coffee helps support the OT coffers, which supports better OT content. Make it happen.
Yeah, support a local cafe, roaster. They're making some nice coffee.
Let's get on to the so who else do we need to thank? We need to thank one other guy.
Major Tom Media for producing the show.
Yeah,
Major Tom, Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, subscribe, tell your friends, neighbors,
review
sisters,
us,
brothers.
Email us at otthepodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, ot.podcast.
Like us
you
on
can
YouTube.
probably follow us on MySpace. Let us know if that happens.
Yeah, we should set. There's probably a MySpace fan page up for us,
Yeah.
and I am going to make another coffee now.
No, done.
So grind some more Inglewood
Write it
up for me.
Write it up. See you later.
Bye.